All right, it looks like we're getting some of you logged on. We're just going to give everybody 1 minute to sign on and we'll get started. All right, as more of you guys are getting on here, I'll start. My name is Cece Mortar. I'm the programs manager for the Steamboat Springs Chamber. I want to give a quick shout out to our series presenting sponsor, Mountain Valley Bank, and our supporting sponsors, Employers Council, Northwest Data Services, and the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. Without them, these wouldn't be possible. I also want to welcome our employment law expert for this series, Tina Harkness. Many of you guys have seen her before at these, but for those of you who haven't, she's an employment law attorney and general counsel for the Employers Council, an employers association that's been supporting Colorado for over 80 years with all of their HR and legal needs. We're lucky to have them here. And so just some quick house cleaning. We will take questions halfway through and then again at the end. So please just put them in when you're thinking about them. There's a few different topics. So as you have them, we'll touch on them when we take the questions. I will be sending out the recording and the slides this afternoon as soon as they're ready, and then some contact information and additional upcoming education series. We have a lot to cover, so I want to thank Tina for coming today, and I will let you take the reins. Tina, thank you.
Thanks, Cece, and good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be back here today to talk about employee retention policies and practices. You might recall my colleague Wayne D'Antoni presented on employee retention last year in a Steamboat or Springs Chamber presentation, and he focused on some culture and leadership aspects to employee retention. When Cece contacted me for this year's presentation, we really wanted to get more into some examples and some samples of employee retention policies and practices, particularly in the area of flexibility in workplace time and workplace where people work these days, to get into competitive pay and different policies on that. And then some of the other flexibility pieces that we're seeing employers try to offer to their workers. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides with you. I will provide these to Cece after the session. And Cece, does that look good? Are we seeing slides there?
Looks great. Thanks.
Okay, wonderful. So then I need to see this. Okay. So we'll talk about some overall changes, trends, policies, practices. Got to do this piece always. So just know that anything we talk about, they may be examples and samples of what other employers have done. They may or may not work for your organization. They may or may not be required of your organization. So just always seek your individual employment law and HR coaching on those things. Just as an introduction, we know, again, as employers in the industry, employers in our mountain communities, the benefits when we can retain a workforce and when we can engage a workforce. Here's some of the things as we start out that are real advantages to keeping people for the long term and keeping them, interested in what they're doing. And we know that we're dealing with challenges always, and particularly in hiring and in retaining workers. So we have a real situation all employers are dealing with where labor force participation rates are declining. We have an aging overall labor pool. We have a lot of folks that have had the pandemic to kind of reshuffle and reconsider the weight of work in their life. Maybe that means they relocated. Maybe that means they retired. Maybe that means they changed industries. That happens quite a lot, or has happened quite a lot. And we're running into, again, fewer applicants for each job and fewer qualified applicants for jobs. So I pulled some information from a bigger survey. So this is a global survey, the McKinsey Great Attrition Survey 2.0, that gathered some data on global data of 13,000 workers on why they were leaving, why they quit their last job. And these are some of the pieces that are there. And I think when you look at some of these things, as we get into and preface what are some policies that can retain and engage workers, I think you can maybe see some places where employers can focus, right? And where your policies might be directed towards avoiding these kinds of issues in your workplace. And I would always encourage an employer to gather data from its own workers. So one thing that's become very popular of late is stay interviews. So those employees who do stick with you, asking them why, what are the reasons? What do they find valuable in working for you, and making sure you don't disrupt those things. But even if and maybe you can even augment those things for further benefits of retention. And then where you have turnover, doing exit interviews of those exiting employees to see why they're leaving, to the extent that they'll provide you with information, right? They may or may not, but some employers will do surveys following, or they'll do even sit down interviews with folks as they're leaving, and get their data. And then there's another possibility of doing employee opinion surveys. If you're large enough, you can set up those kinds of opinion surveys on, again, of your current employees on why they stay. You've also probably seen these numbers before, that the cost of turnover is high, and it's significant when we have to do that. It's not just dollars that goes into that. There are other soft costs, like the time it takes to recruit and hire new staff and get them up to a contributing level in our workplaces. Sometimes that's a shorter learning curve. Sometimes that's a longer learning curve, depending upon the job and depending upon the business. Of course, we run into workload and burnout issues for those coworkers when we have a lot of turnover and we don't have enough staff. I'm sure you've experienced some of those things from time to time. And then those opportunity costs. So that loss of the ability to do work, right? Basically, because you don't have the people to do it, or they're not trained up to do it, and whatever that is. And that may result in our not being able to provide, or having to provide reduced services to whomever our stakeholders are, be those customers, be those citizens in the public sector. So those are those softer costs. Now, this is something that I did borrow from Wayne last year. He put this in his presentation, and this is used, I think, by a lot of human resources professionals as a model for retaining and engaging employees. So again, that those things around the outside of that central retaining and engagement are the areas of focus that can bring you those business results. So this is a bit of a blueprint. And as Wayne talked about last year, if you're shy in one area, for example, maybe you don't pay well, or you're not at the top for salaries, do you make up for that in other ways? And if you pay attention to some of those items, and again, some of those items that cause people to leave, and according to different studies and surveys that are out there, and according to your exit interviews, then you may be able to make up for potentially a shortfall in some other areas. Now, some of these things are even no cost and low cost for employers, because I certainly know that budget is an issue. And Given some of the data on the cost of turnover and those soft costs of turnover, it's probably worth spending some money in that area of employee retention for most organizations. So we're going to kind of borrow from this slide, starting with total rewards. We're going to spend some time on flexibility, work-life balance, a little bit on management practices as well, but we're going to really focus in these 3 areas today with our employee retention policies and samples. So one of the bigger ones, of course, is having competitive pay. And you saw that on a list of reasons people leave: inadequate pay. Now, it wasn't top in the Kinsey survey, it was number 2. The top one was lack of opportunities for advancement and career development, which we will also spend some time talking about today. But you do need to periodically review your compensation plan and your philosophy as an organization. What are the reasons? What are the factors you look at when you're considering how you pay people? How often do you look at it? What are the sources where you look at it? What's your market? Now, some of you who have seen me talk about the Colorado Equal Pay for Equal Work Act might wonder what role market plays. And really, it is still an acceptable factor for employers to figure out if their pay is even in the ballpark. That's that whole competitive piece. As far as what you pay an individual employee compared to another employee performing substantially similar work, we cannot use market. But we have other factors we can use there. But just figuring out overall, where do you fit amongst your peer organizations in your area of your size for pay? Market data is very valuable. And for those of you who are Employers Council members, we did just publish our benchmark compensation survey, which is our largest survey. And that is available on our website, showing, again, breakouts by region of Colorado, also showing Arizona, Utah, Wyoming, if you have employees there. And then it breaks out some by industry and some by organization size. So you can do some of those comparisons. And you may have other industry surveys available to you. I know there are public sector surveys that are out there produced by different organizations. In the private sector, there may be industry groups that produce surveys that you could use for those reasons. Another couple of things I would just say in the pay area is, transparency has been a trend for a while in compensation. It used to be very shrouded in mystery in the private sector, at least. Public sector, you've had to be open about that for some time. But in the private sector, what went into that magic production of the number for what we paid a position was not known by your employees. So being transparent about, again, your compensation plan, your compensation philosophy, even if you don't get down to how the sausage is exactly made, and being transparent about the financial aspects of your business, I think is something that may help in those conversations you have with employees about where you're setting their pay and where you're making adjustments to their pay. Because there are some practical realities here about the organization's overall resources and impacts on your industry that will affect how you pay your employees. And I'll just say, from my end, creating simple, clear pay practices that your employees understand and can ask questions about if they don't understand go a long way towards dealing with dissatisfaction people have with pay, confusions people have with pay, and wage claims, which is what, of course, I'm trying to avoid for you, all of you. So I attended a couple of seminars recently where they had employee retention discussions. So I pulled out from those some examples. One of them was a nonprofit conference. So those are typically organizations that don't have maybe huge budgets to put towards employee retention. So some of those examples come from that. And I also asked some of my colleagues, including Wayne and some other HR consultants who teach our classes on employee retention and employee engagement, what examples they had, particularly from mountain communities, of things that they might be doing to address this area. And so some of the examples I found were, of course, cost of living increases. We know we're dealing with historically high inflation. Even though it has come down, it's still very high. So COLA increases tied to inflation is something that some of those businesses have done or tried to do. So if they didn't exactly keep up with inflation, they couldn't get to that 8% or something higher. They were still trying to get close to that. Other peer businesses to you are doing things like stay bonuses for achievement of particular milestones. So maybe it's an amount of time in the company, maybe it's a skill that they've achieved, maybe you have some competencies for certain jobs, so that when that person gets there, you are providing that additional bump. It's not an increase in pay, because that may not be in the cards for your organization to do that, but it could be a bonus that gives them a lump sum amount for that. And we also ran into an example of retention bonuses for key talent. So some of those critical roles, some of those, they may not be the top of your organization or the entry level of your organization, but they're really key to the organization's functioning. And maybe that's a position that when you lose somebody in that role, the wheels start coming off the bus pretty fast. So retention bonuses are things like, if you stay to X point, or through X date, then you'll receive this retention bonus. That's different from sign-on bonuses. So some employers use sign-on bonuses, like when people come on board. And that can be very effective at being competitive to other peer organizations and make you more attractive in the job offer process. The drawback to a stay bonus is a sign-on bonus is what if the person doesn't stay? There's particularly in Colorado, but in other states as well, it can be very difficult to claw back that bonus because of limitations on how much you can withhold from a final paycheck in many states, and the size sometimes of those stay bonuses. For samples, I pulled out kind of the beginning of our compensation administration sample to give you a little bit of an excerpt of what they have, of what we suggest that go into that evaluation. And of course, we want you to, to be fairly broad brush when it comes to your compensation philosophy, because again, there's a lot that can go into it. And not every factor may go into the evaluation of the pay for every position in your organization, but this gives you a start of some sample language towards a compensation administration policy where you'd want to jump off from here to the different criteria that you would consider. Or another way to do it is the different tools that you use to evaluate compensation. So that might be job description, that might be performance reviews, and some other things. So that's how you can factor in, if you have a pay for performance program, those components without getting so specific or so narrow in your policy as to limit your flexibility. Another aspect of total rewards that employers are looking to for employee retention is paid time off. So workers certainly need time away from work to be at their best when they're there. So we do want to have paid time off policies that not only meet legal requirements, but also work together to give employees the time off they typically need for different things that are going to happen in their lives, personal matters. It could be births, it could be illnesses, it could be deaths, those kinds of things. And we want to be looking at those policies to make sure the amounts are, or the accruals are realistic and appropriate. And I've seen both ends of the spectrum here. Sometimes they're very small, and sometimes they're almost too big where an employee can't actually use that time. So you've got to figure out what's appropriate based on, again, the seniority that you have for your workforce and, again, what people typically need. We want to make sure that our supervisors and managers are monitoring and managing use. So again, from both ends of the spectrum, people who are burning up their time too quickly for what it's expected to cover, which is typically a year, or people who are just not using any of it. We ran into an issue in our organization during the pandemic where people were just canceling their vacations because of precautions due to COVID. And so people had huge numbers of accruals on the books. And we sort of had to, as managers, get our employee numbers and then sometimes sit down with individual employees and say, yeah, let's book some time. Let's figure out, when in the next 3 months you're going to be taking some time off, even if it's a staycation and not the vacation that you hope to have with family or friends. And then I think that's really important is we respect employee time off, giving employees that permission to unplug, and that we do our best not to bother them during that time, because employees are responsive to their leaders, right? Their supervisor, their manager above the organization. And whether we tell them they have to or not, some of them are going to be checking in while they're gone, which could be just to see what might be on their plate, to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. I mean, all good reasons for that, but we really want them to use that time for their own purposes and not for work purposes, unless there's some emergency happening. So some examples I heard up from that nonprofit conference was sabbaticals. So that's interesting, an idea. That's a small number of employers who have those, and those are, it's a larger chunk typically of paid time off for achieving longer milestones with your company. Maybe it's 10 years plus or 15 years plus. The person gets a certain amount of time of paid leave that they can use, again, for their own purposes. That's in addition to the regular paid time off that they get. One nonprofit, even to manage employee leave, gave a $250 bonus to employees who used all their PTO in 1 year, because they were having people that just weren't using their PTO. So that they found was enough of an incentive to get people moving, some of the people who weren't moving on that. Other examples, one nonprofit did Fridays off all summer because they weren't busy or as busy at that time, and they could manage having folks gone 1 day a week at a time where employees might appreciate having some more time off. I know for our organization, we close a little early on Friday. It's only a half hour, but it's something that I've appreciated for the entire time that I have worked for the organization. So those are some things to think about. And then I had another example of a paid shutdown between Christmas and New Year's. So that's another time where many employees, not all employees, but many employees might appreciate some additional time off. And it may be a time where your organization is not as busy. Now, some of you that won't work. Again, I'm just putting out there some ideas for you. So paid time off sample language. So this is kind of an introductory, again, excerpt language that you could use for an entree into your paid time off if you want to have that general bucket. Again, you still want to be meeting legal requirements. So there's going to be certain things that you have to include in a general PTO policy for your state. And then in addition to that, you're going to want to include, of course, amounts. That's usually based for most employers on length of time in the company, any approvals that are needed, and of course, any limitations on the use of PTO. And I guess I would also say, training your employees again on how they record that time for your record keeping purposes and for your leave management purposes. I also put in here personal time sample. Again, the introductory language is here. And then you want to include information about, again, amount, approvals needed, and any limitations. If you have personal time, not every employer has it. Some of you will just have your sick or vacation time, or you'll have a paid time off bank that, again, encompasses this. But if you have something separate, maybe you have sick, vacation, and some personal time that you provide to employees, this could be some language that you might be able to use. We'll do benefits, and then we'll take a quick break and see where we are with any questions, Cece. So if you want to start looking at the Q&A or the chat. So for benefits, if you've heard me talk before, you've probably heard me say I'm not a benefits expert. So I did recommend that maybe Cece look into somebody who is for a presentation to this group, if that is an area of interest to you. But beyond, the fully insured and types of benefits, self-insured types of benefits, I think just some general thoughts around benefits are, prioritizing employee health and wellness. If you go back to the slide on the McKinsey why employees leave, one of those reasons that was, I think, in the 20-somethings% of responses was lack of support for well-being in the workplace. So prioritizing those benefits that promote employee health and wellness, incorporating new benefits, because sometimes our benefits packages stay pretty static and they don't grow or change over time, even though maybe our workers' needs grow and change over time. You want to look at what new benefits are out there that your employees might find valuable or helpful. So there's been a fair amount on student loan debts. There's a lot of our workers that have significant student loan debt and could use some assistance with that repayment. And we've even had some laws in Colorado giving tax credits for helping people with that. Housing assistance is certainly a big issue in the mountain areas. You all know that. So helping employees find housing, buy a home, or find rental property. So there's some examples that we got from different mountain members. One provides limited short-term rental units that are available to their new hires on a first come first served basis. So it's temporary, but it might help them get to the area, start working while they look for housing. Down payment assistance programs, rental deposit assistance programs are also among the examples that our my HR colleagues got from their members that are in the mountains. Commuting also came up from those mountain members, so support with commuting, and several members provided a free regional bus pass to their workers so they could use transportation. Sometimes in the mountain communities we have, pretty good regional transportation that can be used. So taking advantage of that is an option. And then just some some other pieces that were examples that I put in here. There was I think it's a transportation district that really focused on a family atmosphere. It's a smaller workplace, under 20 employees, but really tried to get to know their employees with a focus on supporting them in their personal needs, not taking on the employees' personal issues, but to the extent that the employer could provide some support or some time to those workers, prioritizing that. And another mountain member talked about recruiting applicants who prefer a mountain lifestyle. Maybe they've done that before and they know some of the challenges, but they also know some of the benefits of being in the mountains, as opposed to someone who may have never experienced that, hadn't researched it, didn't have that preference or knowledge. Employee surveys, we'll talk about, we mentioned employee opinion surveys already. They can be pretty helpful here. So those are things that you might want to explore. And there's different free tools for that. There's different low-cost tools for that will send out a survey to your employees, compile the results, and provide those to you. The only thing I would say about surveys, I always say this, is that if you ask, you're expected to do something with that information. So there needs to be some follow-up. So don't ask if you're not going to make any changes as a result of the information you find. And I know you don't have the answers yet, so you're not sure what changes you're going to make, but just have some commitment that we're going to put some resources and some time and some dollars towards changes that we feel are appropriate for our business that come from those survey results. And we will be circling back with our workers on the feedback that they've provided to us, because otherwise those surveys can have a morale impact if it seems like we're not doing anything, we're not listening to our workers. All right, before we get into some flexibility, employee retention policies and practices, Cece, do we have any questions?
There aren't any questions yet, so let's keep moving and we can have people enter them, come back to them later.
Okay. So flexibility also showed up. Lack of flexibility also showed up as a reason that employees are leaving their jobs. And so I think we've got to think about what's appropriate for our business, and try to incorporate some of that flexibility where we can. So flexibility, we'll talk about that in two ways. One is time, and then the other is place. So we definitely have seen changes here, I think, more recently, and with the great attrition that came with the great, I don't know what they call it, the great resignation that came with the pandemic, as people again reconsidered what they were doing for work and how much they wanted to do and where they wanted to do it and all those kinds of things and when they wanted to do it. So as far as time, what can you do? And not all of these are not new, but they may be things that you didn't consider before that you might want to consider now to retain folks. So that flexible start and stop, does everybody have to work 8 to 5, or is that just because we've had that schedule for some time? And again, some of you never worked 8 to 5. So what are your schedules and what flexibility can you provide? Flexibility for personal appointments and just for those life events. That is something that is definitely predominant in the millennial and that Generation Y category of workers, where they want to have a blend of work and personal, rather than you're working solid, this chunk. For us Xers and boomers and maybe World War II that might still be generation folks that are still in the workforce. And then we manage our personal things outside of our work schedule. Compressed work weeks have been around for some time, and those have been popular in different industries at different points. So some examples of that are, full-time workers, which is typically 40 hours a week as a schedule for many organizations. They may be compressing that into 4 10-hour days, or over a 2-week period, working 9 9-hour days and having that 10th day off as a result of working those 9 9s. And then in the healthcare industry, you've had the 8 and 80 option. That's both something that you can do as a business for your workers, but also even is codified into Colorado law as an acceptable practice for the healthcare industry. Newer, and that I'm seeing some articles about shortening up the work week. And this isn't part-time. This is keeping people at their pay and keeping people at their benefits, which again, may seem a little revolutionary, but not having them work 40, having them work 4 9s, right? To trim that down to 36, or 4 8s even to trim that down to 32. Hopefully, I think the idea in the articles I've read is that when people have a shorter work week, there might be more focus, less of that downtime that needs to be built into a longer day or a longer week for workers, where they can focus in on their work, and productivity may not actually be greatly impacted. So some other examples, one from the nonprofit was Powder Club. So some of you, again, in the ski areas may do this. So you get a certain number of inches of snow, and people can be late that day, or some people can be late that day to go and enjoy skiing. One in the nonprofit community was to provide some temporary part-time return following parental leave. So parents who've been off, with newly born children, or adopted or foster care situations, it may be hard for them to get back, and they want some sort of gradual step up process. It's not typically required by law, although there are some laws that will address that if you're covered. But even going outside of that to provide some support on a short-term basis. Flex time, again, maybe employees, have those appointments, they have those things that they need to do. Maybe they can make up at other times during the week to still, give you your due as far as much time. Or maybe if they're on top of all their work, we just don't worry about it, and we give them that flexibility. I talked about early close on Fridays, and then Fridays off in non-peak seasons, or other examples. So flexibility for place, and we'll have some sample language to follow this. Again, the pandemic caused many employers that maybe didn't have remote work to have to do that. Now, some of us did that only for the pandemic, and we're back to working in person, and that's the way that it works best for our organization. But for many organizations, remote work can continue that maybe we didn't have in place before. So where you can, providing remote or hybrid options from the traditional in the workplace everyday options can make you a more attractive organization to retain and engage workers. Or combining work from home, right, with core in-office days or in-office meetings. So I know for some of the departments for our organization, they're doing monthly in-person meetings so they can stay connected in person, but then there's others that are virtual in between. Maybe the weekly meeting is virtual, the monthly meeting is in person, and people are generally working from home unless they've got some collaboration that they're doing with colleagues. Some other examples from the nonprofit community were pet-friendly workplaces. So I did provide some sample pets in the workplace policies, and there was one that did baby-friendly workplaces. So up to 6 months allowed parents to bring in kiddos. Now, again, I'm not advocating or figuring out all the particulars of these. I just want to put these examples out there to see if there's things that might spark ideas for you. Remote work. So a lot of us didn't have remote work. So having some parameters around it. They used to call it telecommuting, but now it's typically called remote work. So this could be the beginning of a policy. Some things you want to make sure you include are, the factors that go into considering whether remote work is appropriate and how much remote work is appropriate. And then, of course, you're going to want to deal with security of your information and sometimes your property when employees work from home. And then the other bigger issue is performance expectations. We're seeing more and more employers that have employees working remotely, looking into different productivity tools and monitoring that they can do for their people that they can't see every day like they used to. So those are going to be things that are going to be tension points, I think, coming down the line. You can understand a business's interest in wanting to track that when someone is a remote worker, and then workers being nervous about to what extent their employers are tracking that, and if that goes a bit too far into their private lives. Here's our pets in the workplace, some sample language to get you started, and then guidelines. And if there are any excluded areas, that comes up in the pets in the workplace. The guidelines are typically like how you're going to manage, and is your pet disruptive? This is one about dogs particularly, which is probably the most common that I've seen as far as allowing pets in the workplace. I really haven't seen other pets coming into the workplace too much. On the culture and environment side, so Wayne also talked about rewards and recognition a bit, but wanted to hit that again because again, this doesn't always have to be money, and it doesn't always have to be big money either to go a long way towards employee satisfaction. So this is really showing appreciation for folks' individual contributions. And employers, I think, sometimes miss opportunities to do this in an organic way, and they may have more formulaic ways of doing it, where you hit certain milestones and you get your pen, you get your gold watch, you get your what have you. But there may be other opportunities to show recognition that are informal that you can think about, just in a staff meeting setting, or in an all-employee meeting setting, or where you acknowledge a specific contribution an employee made. It doesn't always have to be top down either. So there were several examples that I heard from our Mount members and from the nonprofit conference I attended on peer-to-peer level recognition, and how that changed, right, for the employee, the experience of that recognition, because it was coming from their colleague. And then even bottom up, subordinate to a higher level person, or a supervisor, for example, in the organization, and how valuable that is. At Employers Council, we used to have the ability to send somebody just a little card, and nobody else had to see it, but you could get these cards that was just like, I recognize you, and you would write a short note and you deliver it to that person, or they had somebody who would deliver it if you didn't want to deliver it personally, but just some constructive support for that worker. In my sister's workplace, you could give points towards an employee recognition program, so that You could award points to a coworker for their work. And then if they got to a certain level, that they could choose a reward. And they were really small monetary types of things in most cases. Good question here is to figure out how your employees want to receive their rewards and recognition, because sometimes, you could inadvertently have the opposite impact. And I just say for myself, I have one staff member who is a high contributor, a very high performer, and I would acknowledge her in staff meetings and sometimes in all employee meetings, just as I would any other employee, for her contribution. And actually she told a coworker that she just was so self-conscious from that kind of reward or recognition that she preferred not to have that. So I didn't get that feedback directly, but I did understand that and take that feedback and did some of that more privately in the future. Supporting social connections at work, that purpose-driven work that many folks are looking for. Meaningful work or lack of meaningful work showed up in that survey as reasons employee left their job. Some of you have very purpose-driven work already, and the employees that are going to be, or the applicants that are going to be attracted to your job are on board with that. And that is built into your organization. To the extent that's not built in, what are some things you can do to show the meaning in the work that employee does? And maybe you show how their individual contribution affects the organization's success. So tying those things together, because people don't always see that me doing this specific task day in, day out has this overall impact on the organization. They might get that in a macro sense, but like in a micro sense, how do they specifically contribute to the organization's results? And then how do we tie people together? Because one of the other reasons people stay is because of the support of their coworkers and their leaders in organizations. So how do you support those connections at work? And then again, there's organic opportunities and there's more formulaic opportunities to do that. So there's some examples here. One thing that you may or may not have ever done before that we've tried as Employers Council is setting up cohorts of new employees. So we had, for example, I think it was 5 or 6 new attorneys that were hired close in time. So the directors of the different legal departments, because they worked in different departments, got together and said, let's do some organized group sort of onboarding and training of those folks. And then we can do our individual with the departments as well. But that will help these folks get to know other new people in the organization. And of course, this is during pandemic when for our organization, we were working remotely, and they might not have had the chance to bump into somebody in the hallway or at the coffee machine or what have you. So we would do some icebreakers, some tell us about yourself kinds of things, and then do our additional onboarding or training with that group. And I had one person in that group who was really appreciative because knowing the others that were new and having some personal information about them made her feel more comfortable to reach out to those people when she had questions or for their insight on a particular issue down the line, and created some friendships even that may not have existed prior because people were geographically distant. So there's some other samples here of some fun things that you might already do for your employees, but helping employees personally, right, connect can also help you with their retention piece. Training and development is another big aspect. So focusing on continuing education to the extent that there are those opportunities in certain positions is one thing that many of your other mountain members and nonprofit organizations do. I think all organizations do it, but I definitely heard that in both of those contexts. One organization really had a career development plan for all employees. So every level of the organization, here's the career development plan, for you, so that, hopefully you stay, because we want people to grow with the organization. Also opportunities to be mentored and to mentor someone can be good retention tools. If you are a senior employee in your organization, you know the ropes. You're maybe pretty used to the tasks of the job, and they might not be as challenging for you anymore. Training somebody on how to be as good as you are at that role could be another employee satisfaction piece. Or again, having the opportunity as a new employee to have another employee as your mentor, in addition to the resources of your supervisor, your manager, or your leader in the organization, as somebody else you can go to when you're learning to do your job. So this last item is something you might run into. I know we run into. We have a pretty flat organization. The ladder is not tall as far as the growth you can have in our organization because of how we're set up. And maybe you are similar. So one of my colleagues described a career lattice instead of a career ladder. So you might not be going up, but you might be going out. So maybe you're leading projects. Maybe you are gaining knowledge on a specialty in your field. Those kinds of things could be still development opportunities. Maybe you're taking on a greater coordination role, even if you're not being promoted. Those are kinds of things that would go into that career lattice idea. And of course, there's budget that goes with these. So budgeting for that career, continuing education, job-related coursework, and sometimes certifications that you have out there. And again, I told you I'm not a benefits expert, but I do know if you do some tuition reimbursement programs, that there could be tax incentives that you could receive as an organization for doing that. I mentioned this at the beginning, seeking feedback from your employees. These are some ways you can do that. There are some survey tools that are low cost or even no cost. I know you're probably going to get the ads with the no cost ones, so maybe you don't want that. Maybe you want to invest a little bit in there. And then stay interviews. There's lots of examples of stay interview structures and questions that I found when I just Googled stay interviews that you can look at and customize for your organization. For those of you who are Employers Council members, I can connect you to our human resources professionals who can help you come up with stay interview questions. Same on the exit interview side. There's lots of free resources out there, and then we can support you with those things. So that's a lot of information. Of course, you're going to have to choose your organization's approach, because you're probably not going to be able to do all of that or even most of that. You'll be able to do some of that, or maybe a few things, or even just a couple things. So looking at how you rank your retention strategies, really getting your data. So what's your cost of turnover, right? What's your rate of turnover? I've seen things that say, 10% is kind of a goal for healthy amount of turnover, because there's some good turnover out there, and there's some that you're just never going to be able to prevent, but hopefully you can retain 90%. Well, you may or may not be there, and that may not be common in your industry either. So what does your data tell you? The other data to gather is, again, why people are staying, why people are leaving. Because I've given several examples and we've given you survey data, but that may not be why your folks are staying or why your folks are leaving. And then can you implement, what can you realistically budget towards employee retention strategies? And what can you actually do, right? Do you have the resources, the people, the time, all those things that go into implementing employee retention strategies? If you don't have much budget or much time or people to put towards this, you're going to want to look for more plug and play kind of solutions that might move the needle to some extent, but may not fully get you everything that we talked about. So just some closing thoughts. We know turnover is costly. Just want you to know there are no cost, low cost, and some more plug and play employee retention strategies that you can employ, even if you don't have a lot of resources. And of course, we know retaining and engaging employees benefits all aspects of your business, and it's worth it. If you get results from it, of course, that's the other piece of this evaluation and measurement. If you get results from it, it's worth putting the money into it. CC, where are we at with questions?
We don't have any in there right now. If you guys want to put in any questions, I can start kind of closing out and we can get to them after. I want to thank everyone for participating today. Again, we'll send out the session recording and the slides for you guys. If there's anything else you're interested in, let me know and I'll see what I can do. Our next business education series is our grant series, which will cover grant opportunities, grant writing, and project management. And then we also just opened registration for the Women's Summit this week. I'll send more information on those in our follow-up email. And then I want to thank our sponsors again, Mountain Valley Bank, the Employers Council, Northwest Data Services, and the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. We can wait just a couple more minutes to see if there's any questions. Otherwise, it was great to see everybody. And thank you, Tina.
Thank you.
We do. One just came in. Oh, just a comment. These are great strategies and info. I didn't leave my current job because they have such progressive workplace policies.
Yeah, and I do think that in the mountain communities, you guys you've had to be progressive for a while because of some other challenges. There's things that attract people to those communities, and then there's things that make it sometimes difficult for people to stay in those communities. So I'm glad to hear that.
There's also one plug for the family-friendly handbook that is on the chamber website.
Oh, yes.
It does have policies that are written that you can literally pull out and just plug in your business name and adjust as needed to make it relevant for your business. But there's stuff for flexible scheduling. There's stuff for health and benefits. There's stuff for like accommodations for pregnancy. There's a lot in there. Some of it is relevant to family, but some of it is relevant to just everybody. So check it out.
Great.
I can send a link to that in the follow-up as well.
Thanks, Cece. I meant to mention those because I was aware the chamber had those.
No problem. Thank you. If you guys think of questions after this, just send them to me via email and me and Tina can maybe touch base and get them answered. Thank you so much, Tina. We'll see you guys all later. Bye.
Take care. Bye.